There's a specific kind of fear that only writers really understand. Not the fear of failure, not even the fear of being mocked. It's the fear that your best work might never be allowed to exist. Not unpublished, not unfinished, but forbidden. Quietly, bureaucratically, without drama. Mikhail Bulgakov didn't worry about whether people would like his writing. He worried that the people in charge would pretend it didn't exist at all. Imagine writing a novel so dangerous that no one around you is even willing to be caught reading it. Imagine knowing it's the most honest thing you'll ever create, and also knowing it might cost you your career, your safety, or your sanity. Bulgakov didn't die celebrated. He died censored, ill, and convinced that the world he lived in had no space for him, except as a problem. And somehow, he still wrote the Master and Margarita. This isn't a story about genius winning. It's a story about imagination refusing to die quietly. Mikhail Bulgakov was born in 1891 in Kiev, back when it was part of the Russian Empire. His childhood was orderly, intellectual, and structured. His father was a theology professor. Books were normal. Education was expected. Thinking deeply wasn't dangerous. Yet. This matters because Bulgakov didn't grow up trying to be rebellious. He grew up believing that culture, intelligence, and reason worked. That society rewarded seriousness. That learning gave you protection. History demolished that illusion. He trained as a medical doctor, served during World War I, treated wounded soldiers, worked through epidemics, real suffering, real blood, real consequences. At one point, he became addicted to morphine after using it to manage pain. He later dragged himself out of that addiction and turned the experience into fiction that feels disturbingly intimate. But medicine wasn't his obsession. Language was. By the time the Russian Revolution settled into its new reality, Bulgakov found himself living in a culture where writing wasn't just art, it was evidence. Every sentence could be examined. Every metaphor could be misread. Every joke could be fatal. Early Soviet society didn't just want writers to be talented, it wanted them to be useful. Art was expected to educate the masses, reinforce ideology, simplify reality, and celebrate the future. Anything ironic, ambiguous, or uncomfortable wasn't just frowned upon, it was suspicious. Bulgakov's problem wasn't that he was anti-Soviet in a loud way, it's that he was unimpressed. He wrote satire, he wrote fantasy, he wrote characters who were cowardly, corrupt, absurd, selfish, not as villains, but as everyday people. That kind of honesty doesn't age well in authoritarian systems. For a brief moment, Bulgakov tasted success. His plays were staged, audiences responded, critics noticed. And then, slowly, almost politely, the doors closed. One play would be approved, then abruptly banned. Another would run for a short time, then vanish. Reviews would swing wildly between praise and quiet condemnation. Eventually, nearly everything he wrote was prohibited. No dramatic arrest, no public trial, just professional suffocation. He was alive, healthy enough to work, and completely cut off from his audience. This is where most people would adapt. They'd soften the satire, trim the edges, write what they knew would pass. Bulgakov didn't. Instead, he began writing for the drawer, a Soviet phrase meaning work you never expect to publish in your lifetime. And this is where the Master and Margarita begins. Not as rebellion, not as protest, as a private act of stubborn imagination. A novel written with no hope of approval, which made it brutally honest. On paper, the Master and Margarita is completely unpublishable. The devil appears in atheist Moscow, a talking cat terrorizes bureaucrats, Jesus is depicted not as propaganda, but as a fragile human figure. Writers are shown as fearful opportunists. Authority figures are humiliated through absurdity rather than confrontation. Reality bends. Logic collapses. Truth slips through jokes. Bulgakov wasn't hiding meaning. He was layering it. And he knew exactly how dangerous that was. This is the part that always messes with me. Because Bulgakov isn't chasing martyrdom. He's not trying to be heroic. He's tired. He's bitter. He's watching other writers survive by saying less and less until their work becomes empty. And instead of doing that, he chooses imagination. Not optimism, not hope. Imagination as refusal. That's a quiet kind of courage, and a very lonely one. What makes Bulgakov's story unsettling isn't the suffering. Plenty of people suffered. It's that he recognized something early. Modern power doesn't need to destroy artists. It just needs to ignore them. To let them exist without visibility, without platforms, without relevance. That's a cleaner, quieter form of control. Bulgakov saw this happening in real time and wrote anyway. At one point, desperate and exhausted, Bulgakov wrote directly to Stalin, not to praise him, not to flatter. He asked for permission to work, or to leave the country. Anything but professional silence. Stalin responded with a phone call. Polite, calm, vague. Nothing changed. That moment captures Bulgakov's entire life. Acknowledgement without relief. Bulgakov lived in a system where visibility was conditional. Today, we pretend expression is free because platforms exist. But his story reminds you that being allowed to speak isn't the same as being allowed to be heard. Sometimes the pressure to self-edit does more damage than censorship ever could. That's why his story doesn't feel historical. It feels familiar. Bulgakov never finished The Master and Margarita in the way he wanted. He revised it obsessively. His health collapsed. He lost his sight. He dictated changes from memory. He died in 1940, convinced the novel might vanish with him. It didn't. Decades later, it emerged. Damaged, censored, incomplete, and still felt dangerous. Bulgakov's story doesn't motivate you to create. It makes you uneasy about why you hesitate. It cracks the idea that honesty is always rewarded and replaces it with something darker, but truer. That some work survives not because the world wanted it, but because it refused to disappear. What gets me isn't that Bulgakov was eventually recognized. It's that he didn't live long enough to see it. No victory lap, no apology from history. Just years of writing without confirmation that it mattered. That's not inspiring. That's unsettling. Mikhail Bulgakov didn't win against his world. He outlasted it. And sometimes that's the only victory imagination gets.